we're going to move to session 2. So we're done with the introduction. We're going to start with the overview of the tool itself, how it was put together, what's supposed to help with, and how. We started a few years ago. I'll give you the timeline here on the next slide. And the intent was to elevate the worth and utility of earned value management systems through unbiased scientific research. Hence why the Department of Energy approached our team here at Arizona State University to be able to work with a host of agencies as well as contractors and consultants and look at EVMS and its utility from a completely unbiased perspective. We are not the owner. We are not the contractor. We are an academic entity that's trying to look at data and make sense of it and provide resources to both. And with that, develop a scalable model for EVMS maturity and environment. What do we mean by scalable? It's got to apply to unique missions and project types for various agencies. Particularly here, we were looking at federal agencies, DOE, DOD, NRO, NASA, and so on. The focus was on large, complex projects and programs. We'll give a few examples here on the next slide. And we wanted to ensure that we are inclusive of the EIA 748 requirements, which are used quite a bit, but also inclusive of others such as PMI, ISO, and many more. You'll see a lot of references in a lot of the work that we're going to be providing here. So the types of large and complex projects and programs that this tool was designed around are some that you are seeing here on the screen. They vary quite a bit from energy to construction to manufacturing to aerospace and so on and so forth.
So I'll jump in here a little bit, Munir. I think that, certainly there are a couple of other things that we did. We wanted to make sure that it was usable both by the client and contractor organization. So we included lots of input from both of those as we go. And you'll see that in just a moment as well. And I think Mel is on, if you want to get him to say a few words as well. Our sponsor at DOE was Mel Frank. If Mel, if you want to say a couple of words.
Yeah, no, thank you, Ed. I appreciate that. Yeah, so the Department of Energy did initiate this study and bring Arizona State University on board to, execute the study, to run through it, to provide that unbiased, scientific approach for a research project of this magnitude. And I really appreciate what they've done. Thanks, Ed and Munir, Hala, you've really done a great job on this. But what it's really done is it's, I think, provided a paradigm shift across how earned value management can and should be looked at and how it should be implemented and assessed. So what's the paradigm shift? And there's several of these. So what the data has ended up showing is that instead of just a compliance-centric approach to implementing EVMS, we now have a results-oriented approach, okay? The data demonstrates that with good EVMS implementation, you can get great results. And I'll let them talk about that when they get to it. But it also, and why is that? Because we're not just measuring along one component, but we're measuring a very vital component called environment. And that's what today is about, okay? So huge win in what we've been able to do with this study, okay? And the third component that I think, is a paradigm shift for those who are very used to working with lots of metrics to, dig in and say, here's what's broken, here's what's wrong. Well, you don't necessarily always have to have all of that data and those metrics behind you or with you. Certainly valuable, certainly provide an objective piece of the puzzle. But as I think you'll see today and tomorrow as you work through the examples, a little bit of data, a little bit of information, you can make a lot of insight based on what the attributes explain how to use them. And you can really get to some ground truth about what's happening on a project and identify those gaps of what needs to be worked on. So, some key paradigm shifts that I hope you really understand as you go through the today and tomorrow. So thank you, Ed and Munir, for putting this training on. And I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Mel.
Thank you, Mel. That was really, really helpful. And it really puts in perspective a lot of what we've done and the context around it. And how did we get to this paradigm shift, to use your words here. We kicked off mid-2019, not alone, but with the steering team of 41 members, expert members around EVMS, representing 24 organizations. We'll show some of these names on the screen, on the next screen here. We've also built it on a literature review of more than 600 publications. You can see some examples in that list. So we really try to make sure we understand what does the literature and what do all the guidebooks and standards have to say about this very topic. So we're not reinventing the wheel, but instead pulling everything together and making sense of it all. But not just the literature, we also worked with industry experts. Some of you are actually here on the line with us today. We did a survey. We got close to 300 unique responses. So now we have the literature, and now we also have the experience of the folks that have been doing it for years. And then together with the steering committee, we developed a working draft with 27 environment factors. We'll talk about environment today, and 56 maturity attributes. We'll talk about maturity tomorrow. It didn't start as 27 and 56, but we did it iteratively through a series of 12 different workshops. Some of you also have participated in those and collected data along the way. And in these workshops, we got input from 136 industry experts. So you can see we're showing a lot of numbers here to show you the validity and how many people have touched this thing that you're about to see here. This is not just the 3 or 4 of us here at ASU working on it in a closed lab. This is an industry-wide effort. Eventually, once we were done with the development, we collected data on 35 completed projects and programs worth close to $22 billion. And that was intended to show what we've done as inputs versus the performance of these projects as outputs, some of which we will share a little bit today and a lot more tomorrow in this training. So we've tested this on completed projects. We've also tested the tool on ongoing projects, 8 in particular, close to $7 billion worth of projects. So you can see, close to $1 billion per project or program there. And at DOE's request, once we were done with all the work, we've turned it into software. So we have an arm here at ASU called the Decision Theater. They've helped us put this into software, a web-enabled software that we will actually be using today. So Zach West from DOE generously put together a short video for us that walks us through all of this, which we will show a little later today. And now we're at the phase where it's training time. Let's make sure the word is out. We disseminate this tool. Everybody knows that it's there, that they can use it, that it can help them, and also how to do that. So this is where we came from and where we are today. Some of the organizations that have contributed to the tool, whether it's by providing their data or providing their insights, or somebody that sat on our committee or on our steering team, or provided input into the survey or integrated into the workshop. So there were many ways to contribute. And you can see a lot of these names here on the screen, recognizable names, of course. And that's what I meant when I said it's an industry-wide effort. This is not a small little study. And hopefully that backs up what Mel was pointing to in the beginning. It really helps with that paradigm shift. And we got a lot of inputs into that. Ed?
Yeah, thanks, Munir. Certainly one of the things I hope that you get out of this is we really were focused on use-inspired, developing something that is usable and can help you improve your organization and how you address projects and programs. One of the first things we needed to do really was come up with some definitions. And so if we can go to the next slide, please. And these are some of the definitions that we came up with. Some of these, there were definitions out there. I think we started out with about 25 or so people on the steering committee. It kind of evolved over time, and we probably had about 35 different definitions of EVM, for instance, and maybe about 45 definitions of EVMS amongst us. And so we decided to really come up with some definitions to help us all be grounded on where we were going with the study. You can see that one that we came up with early on was looking at EVM and EVMS, and certainly EVM is using performance management information to plan, direct, control, and forecast. And then EVMS is actually the system that allows us to pull all that together. And so it was important for us to come up with those definitions. As we continued moving through this thing, though, we felt like that if you look at, and I'll show it in just a few moments, if you look at the whole system, it's really an integrated project or program management system. And so we came up with this definition at the very top, and that gets back to the name of the tool, Integrated Project Program Management, IP2M, as we go forward. Next slide, please. We also came up with some other definitions. I know Munir and also Mel talked about, this idea of environment and, valuing what compliance means, but understanding that compliance is not everything that makes you successful on a project or program. And so early on, we started looking at this whole idea of a system that's also part of an organization, and the organization brings an environment both on the client side and on the contractor side, and that environment can help us be successful or it can hurt us. And so we came up with this term for environment. It's the conditions. We divided it into 4 areas: people, culture, practices, and resources that either enable or limit us in our ability to manage using EVMS. And then maturity really is the degree in which our implemented system and its processes serve as a basis for effective and compliant EVMS. Now, you'll notice there's a couple of things down at the bottom. I mean, we added in a dimension, and there's a lot of literature out there about techno-social systems. And that's really what we're talking about here. We can have great technology, great systems, but if we don't have the right environment to manage those over time, then we typically don't have very good results. So today we're going to focus on the environment, but we're going to give you an overview of the whole tool before we start focusing on environment. Next slide. So this is the IP2M meter using EVMS. So that's a real mouthful, but basically what you can see is that our earned value management system is at the center here, and there are 10 different sub-processes that support EVMS, from organizing all the way to risk management. And you're probably very familiar with many of these, especially if you're involved very closely with EVMS. And so part of our tool focuses on the technical side, i.e. these 10 sub-processes. And basically, these 10 sub-processes in EVMS are within the orbit, right, of the rest of the system, which involves the culture of the organization, the people who run it, the practices that are used, and the resources that are provided to help the technical system be successful. So that's kind of how the whole tool fits together. Next slide, please. So if we broke it out and we looked at environment, you'll see that the environment really is made up of 27 factors. And those factors, we, over a period of time, as we started looking at them, we divided them up into 4 categories, or environment categories. 1 is in culture, 2 is in people, and so on and so forth. I've mentioned those before. So when you're evaluating the environment of your project or program, then you evaluate it from the basis of each one of these, and it'll tell you how are we doing from an environment perspective, and it may give you some insight into things that you need to improve upon as you move forward. Next slide, please. So these 27 environment factors, and hopefully it's not too repetitive. We'll show you these again a little bit later in the session today, but we wrote them out here. Everything has a sentence that identifies it kind of at a high level. So you'll see that, for instance, culture factor 1A is the contractor organization is supportive and committed to EVMS implementation, including making the necessary investments for regular maintenance and self-governance. And you'll notice there's some bolded words here. And so we tried to bold some words in each one of these. So it kind of gives you a shorthand of what we're talking about here. You'll notice that under culture, there's 7 factors, 1A through 1G. And so each one of the categories is divided up into a number of sub-factors. You'll see the second category is people down at the bottom. You're going to get a chance to see some of these in a lot of detail, so I'm not going to go through each of these. So let's go to the next slide. The next slide is the second half of this, which deals with practices and resources. Now, it's kind of interesting when you look at one of these titles. For instance, the project program promotes and follows standard practices to implement and execute an EVMS. Well, we took that shorthand sentence and we put more information behind it. So each one of these actually has a description that gives you more information about what we are talking about here. So let's go to the next slide, please. So for instance, this is what you would see if you were evaluating or looking at factor 1A, the one that I read off a few moments ago. And you'll see that to the right is a description that supports what we mean by that title sentence. And so if you were evaluating your project or program, then you would take a look at this sentence, you would read through what we mean by this, and then you would evaluate that, and we'll show you how that works a little later in the session. And so you would go through and do that for all 27 of the factors, and that would give you an idea of how well your environment is set up to support the technical issues floating around the EVMS. Next slide. So the second half of the tool, as I mentioned a few moments ago, really are these 10 IP2M sub-processes. And you can see those, they support earned value management. As you can imagine, this was a big part of our effort because, you know, there are certain things that are in 748. There are certain things that are in different organizations. I think we started out with over 90 of these attributes, and we narrowed it down and combined everything together so that they made sense. And it ended up being 56. It could have been 55. It could have been 58. We just, as a team, decided that 56 was the right number as we went through there. Again, what you would do is go through and look at each one of these sub-processes and underlying attributes, and you assess each one on a scale of 1 to 5, and we'll show you how you do that. And so these sub-processes, as it says here, are a series of interrelated tasks that transform inputs into a system to achieve earned value management. And so the process itself is broken up into these 10 sub-processes. And let's go to the next slide. And then the next slide will show you the 56 maturity attributes. And so if you looked at the tool and you looked at a lot of the terms that are on here, if you're very familiar with EVMS, you're very familiar with many of these. And so we put them together into these sub-processes such as organizing, planning and scheduling, material management, risk management. And you can see that we range anywhere from 2 to 12 attributes per sub-process. Next slide, please. Of course, we didn't leave it right there. We actually came up with a situation where we defined each one of these attributes in a lot of depth. And so I'll kind of go through the process of how they're defined as we go here, or we will really more tomorrow. But you can see that what we mean by product-oriented work breakdown structure, attribute A1 is on the left. You'll see that maturity level is across the top. And then each one of the levels of maturity is described. And so simply for your project, you read through these descriptions and you pick the one that most closely relates to how this attribute is, or how mature this attribute is for your project. You'll get a chance to work on that tomorrow and actually evaluate several of these and see the entire part of the tool as we move forward. So again, just kind of summarizing the tool itself, if we go to the next slide, the tool itself is made up of 2 components. It's made up of environment, and it's made up of the technical maturity of your earned value management system. And as Munir mentioned earlier, just to kind of give you a quick heads up for what some of the things we'll talk about tomorrow, and we'll go into more depth of this. But basically, we developed the tool, then we went back and tested it on completed projects using people who were engaged in those projects, about $21.8 billion from several different industry sectors. And what we found was that if you have a more mature EVMS with a better environment, statistically, you're going to have better results in terms of cost growth without change orders, CPI, compliance, meeting objectives, and customer satisfaction. Basically, statistically, we could actually find differences between those projects that had better environments and better maturity than those that did not. We'll share a lot more about that tomorrow, and it's also in the documents that you can download as we move forward. So you may ask, well, how do we use this thing? And, what's the software like and so on. So let's I'll talk through some things real quickly, and then we'll also talk about these during our workshop. The tool itself doesn't do any work for you. What it does is it helps you evaluate how you've been doing and what you need to do. And so it helps you identify through the score sheets and descriptions. It helps you measure where you are, both from a maturity of the technical side and also from a maturity of the environment side. And it helps you then develop a system to mitigate or prioritize your corrections. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to have success. You still have to do the work. It doesn't address everything that you could possibly ever consider, because we tried to make it as widely usable and generic as we could. And as I said, it doesn't really do any of the planning or work for you. It just helps you identify those gaps. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we really feel strongly about is that if you're going to do an evaluation using the IP2M meter, you can certainly do one with one person sitting in a room just filling out the software. But the reality of it is you get a lot more for your buck if you've got the right people sitting in the room. And I think it depends a lot on the project or program and where it is in its life cycle, but you would probably want to have a combination of the following folks that are shown on this slide to do that assessment, because what you're trying to do is get a 360-degree view of where you are in terms of your environment and also in terms of the maturity of your systems in place. So this is a team-based process. And we're going to kind of go through how that team-based process works through the exercise this afternoon and tomorrow as we evaluate. Next slide, please. What we found is that the two different components of IP2M meter tool take different times to do in terms of assessment. What we found as we've used this thing on in-process projects is, with a facilitated session, which we very much recommend you have a facilitator. To do an environment assessment, it takes somewhere around 2 to 3 hours with the individuals we talked about earlier in the room. If we're doing a maturity assessment, obviously it's more issues to consider. There are a lot of technical issues that you go through, and it takes anywhere from 3 to 5 hours. So together, you take somewhere between 6 and 8 hours to do the assessment. It doesn't have to be done on the same day or together. It's just that's about how much time it takes if you've got an integrated project team doing the assessment using the tool and the software. Next slide, please. So I think I'll pass it over to Munir at that point.
Thank you, Ed. Great overview. At this point, we're going to share a short video of the software. We understand a lot of us are interested in the end result, right, and how this is actually going to be used on our project. So we have two versions of this tool. There's the PDF version or the paper version, which we have shared with you earlier in the link and also in the invitation. And also there's the, we turned it into software, which we will share with you here in just a second.
Hello, I am Matthew West from the Department of Energy, Office of Project Management, and I was also the Arizona State University Research Project for the IP2M meter lead for the specification and testing of the accompanying software. As of November of 2022, we have piloted this software and are now ready to make it available to those eligible. The software is developed by the Decision Theater at Arizona State University, and the specification for it was built, like the research, based on a team from academia, government, and industry, partnering to define the way the software needed to operate. In the case of the tool that you're learning about in this course, IP2M METRR, the software is designed to accompany that tool and best support the development and the utilization of it in an assessment. So let's take a look at the way the tool exists today in its first release, version 1.1. Based on use, this will be updated in the future with future releases. So as mentioned, the software was designed to support both desktop and server, and it can be installed onto each by means of using a Linux container. Now, in doing that and delivering it in a Linux container, for those that are putting it on a desktop, it does need to go into what's called Docker Desktop, an additional piece of software. We'll discuss that a little bit more at the end. There are 3 roles built into the system: administrator, facilitator, and user. And there's a handbook for each of these roles under the resource section. So this time, let's take a look around the software. So under the username where you log in, you have the ability to go to resources. It might take a second. So once there, you have the ability to download the 3 user guides for the admin, participants, and facilitators, as well as links to a glossary and a couple of templates that can be utilized while using the software tool, as well as a link to the process documents for IP2M METRR. Let's take a little bit more of a look around the administrative area. So in terms of assessments, an administrator can see all of the ones that are within their database if it's put onto a server, and has the ability to delete them, sort them, and create a new one to help support a facilitator out. Now, while this says Department of Energy at the top, the tool was designed to be customized. If you were, say, Lockheed Martin, you could put your name here, put your logo here, Boise, or Jacobs, or Department of Defense, or NASA. You have the ability to customize the tool in your delivery. You also have the ability to tie it in to single sign-on through SAML and set the amount of time that you would like before a session expires if people are not actively using it. With that, the administrator also has the ability to back up all the data or export all the data out, such as if you were going to do a clean install on your servers and import it back in. Now, currently for the administrator, they also have the responsibility to load the user base into the tool. Right now, if you have, say, 200 or 300 people in your organization who are going to use it, it's preferable if you put them in by their name and email and their role. In the case of Department of Energy, where we will go from site to site, we put in an Enviro 101, 02, 03, some temporary type user accounts, and issue that, have a specific email to it for that one use, and then not email, but admin password with it, and then change the password after the use and can reuse it on another site. But we do put in those who are going to use it over and over again as well and make it available to them. So that really kind of hits the highlights of the administrator. I'm going to log out of this mode and we'll go take a look at a facilitator role. Yep, different password. So as a facilitator, I have the ability to create new assessments, and in doing so, I can create one that is one that we could just use for this demonstration. So I'll give it a project ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We'll call it class test, and then we'll look at a type. Maybe this is all about demolition. Now, this is a key one. The facilitator's name needs to be in there. In my case, it's Matthew Zachary. I go by Zach, so Zach West, and that was loaded in by the admin. The project manager also can be in here. It's optional. But in this case, we'll put in Ed Gibson. The location might be Phoenix. And the date could be, the date that we're doing this video, how far along it is, and any appropriate notes. Now notice over here you have the ability to select if you're doing maturity or environment, or maturity and environment. Both are selected, indicating I'm doing both. You can have as a default to hide some of the full descriptions, and in the class you're in, you can discuss that a little bit more. And under environment, you can make it anonymous to everyone, including the facilitators, or anonymous to only participants, where facilitators and admins can see who was the one that made the comment. We'll create this assessment, and I will go ahead and add a couple folks to it. You basically start to type in the person's name, so we'll add a couple of generic ones. In this case, they are a user. That role will pop up because that's how they were loaded. And the organization, are they an owner or a contractor? In this case, contractor will state, and we'll make them a PCE and add them. And we'll add Enviro to (102). This might be an owner who's participating, and they may be a project controls member of the owner's team. So we can add people to the review. There's a little more detail that can come in. And now you have the ability to go into the assessments. If you go into maturity, you'll start right in. Again, you'll discuss that more in your course. Or you can go back and you'll be able to go into the environment and fill out the process. Now the environment side is a little bit special in that in the environment, it's designed for many to fill out simultaneously. And that's done by issuing the URL that you assign and the user accounts to those people that are participating on the environment side. And when they go into the assessment, you tell them which assessment to go in if there are more than one. And by that I mean when you're back at home, you might have several on your plate. In this case, you tell them to go into the one that you are currently working in. And we'll call that class test. And as they go through, they will have just the ability, as you go through the like 1A all the way down to the 27th factor, to put their rating in and their comments. And that will be aggregated at the end into the statistical pool. You'll discuss more of that in your class. So reports, you can't go into maturity or environment yet because you haven't finished them. And on the overall report, it doesn't show anything yet because you don't have data in there. I will go back and just take a peek at one that we've done. I'll just grab one that we did with the federal team at a site in New Mexico. We'll take a quick look at the reports, and you can see the environmental score will show up if you click on environment. The maturity score will show up if you click on maturity, and overall your score will show up against the different gradations within the 2x2 matrix. And that again will happen after the scores are submitted. But back to environment, as we said, it's a many to one. So you will see that there will be a mean and a box and whisker type design. This will be improved to a true box and whisker in a future release to help you take a look at the magnitude of where that one standard deviation was and how much the outliers were. So that is built into the tool. And again, I won't log in as a user, but a user can just see the environmental section for the one aspect, and I think you'll do that as part of an example today. Again, each section had a handbook, and as we go down through it, Um, you probably want to know, okay, how do I get this software? Okay, at this time, we're setting up a way to get the software, most likely via GitHub, and we'll discuss with your organization as needed the security details that were put into this. DOE has scrubbed the libraries, and to ensure they're the most current and most resistant to attack at the time it was delivered to us from Decision Theater, that has been confirmed and verified. If you are looking again to add it to your laptop or desktop, there are specific instructions that you will need to follow. And again, if you're not very much used to using Docker desk side, it is something that might take a little bit of time at first, and you're probably going to want to leave a little extra time to do it. While Docker is very common to the IT professionals and those working in servers, it may very well be new to those of you who are using desktops. So I would ask that you please contact me directly to get a copy. For those who are members of the government or organizations that are support contractors to a government organization doing earned value oversight, as well as the industry working on government contracts, you're eligible to get this software. Let me put up my email address, and I would ask that you email me with any requests you might have towards that end. Yeah, that was a little bit small. Let's blow that up. So with that, again, Matthew Zachary West, go by Zach. And my email, matthew.west@hq.doe.gov. Thank you for your time today, and look forward to your emails and questions on this.